Good afternoon, everybody. Pnawn da pawb, and welcome to our event this afternoon. We were just saying, actually, we were expecting around 80 people, which is really, really positive, and we're really encouraged by the number of people that have taken up today's invitation. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time to come along to the event today. My name's Heather Powell. I'm the Connected Communities Manager for Newport City Council. So I look after equality, diversity and cohesion. And part of the work that my team have been delivering over the last sort of 18 months to 2 years has been focused on the way that we support our EU citizens, our EU communities in Newport, particularly in the light of changes to immigration law and some of the impacts that leaving the EU has had on those communities, and making sure people still feel safe, secure and supported to continue to call Newport their home. So today's event is really about raising awareness across a range of professionals working in different sectors about the rights and entitlements of EU citizens as they stand today, because one of the things we've had flagged to us as a concern by communities is that they are increasingly experiencing discrimination when trying to access services. So we all have a responsibility to address that and to be informed in the way that we deliver our services. So that's what today is all about. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping first. Everyone would have been muted as they've entered the meeting room. So there are a lot of us here today. If we could just ask you to keep your microphones off, so the speakers aren't disturbed when they're giving their input. Please keep your cameras on if you feel comfortable doing so, because it's always nice to see who you're speaking to. As we go through the sessions today, please feel free to use the chat and pop in any questions that you might have. And one of our partners will either answer the question directly in the chat, or we can pick up the question at the end of the sessions when we've got some time for questions and answers. Although we would say that if your question is about any particular case or any particular person, we won't be able to answer that specifically, but there will be contact details for all of our experts here today, so you will be able to get in touch with them separately and outside of this event. A slight sort of caveat on all the information that you'll be hearing about today. It is correct as of today's date, but as we know with these things, it is quite a fluid situation. Legislation changes very regularly, and there will be updates to the information that you hear today. But as of today, what we're telling you is all correct. After the event, we'll be circulating a document with all of the details of the partners who'll be speaking today, and it will also have a summary of the information that you'll be hearing about as well, and you may find that useful as you go forward. If we move on to the agenda, I'll run quickly through how today's going to go. If Alex shares the screen, here it comes. Thank you. So as you can see, today is really a series of bite-sized information sessions, which will hopefully give you a really good overview of everything that's kind of topical and relevant to EU citizens today. And there will be some time at the end, as I've already said, for questions and answers. So I'm going to hand over now to Councillor Jane Mudd, the leader of Newport City Council, who's kindly come along today to welcome you all.
Hello everybody, and thank you for coming along to join us today. We really do value the contribution that you make, and I just, on the subject of practical housekeeping, just to say, if you do hear any background noise while I'm speaking to you, I do apologise for the washing machine, but it's one of the practicalities of working from home, I'm afraid. So this is real life in action, isn't it? And on the subject, actually, of real life in action, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Newport. and our wonderful multicultural city. It's migration has brought us such benefits over the years, and as a council, what we really want to do is continue to welcome people to Newport. And importantly, what we want to do is to ensure that those who've chosen to call our city their home continue to do so. And now we know in order to do this, we have to ensure that we're all aware of the changes that have taken place over the last 2 years and the new challenges that people are now facing. And Heather's talked about that. We know we've got an awareness, we do know about how difficult life has become for some people in our communities, especially as levels of hate crime and discrimination have started to increase. And Heather mentioned the Welsh perspective on this, and I'm sure many people here today who work in this area will have seen the open letter that the First Minister wrote to EU citizens last week, and it moves me incredibly to reflect on what he said and his very sincere words. And all I can do as the leader of Newport City Council is to echo those sincere words to everybody who chooses to come and live here and work here and form part of our vibrant communities. You are and always will be welcome here in Newport, and this is so important to us all here. We want to welcome people, we want to support people, we want to support people to address their challenges, but we want people to know and understand that Newport welcomes them. So as professionals and service providers, public service employees, we echo those words. And I think through our own actions, we want to do everything that we can to make sure that people can fully exercise their rights. And this is really important, such an essential aspect of this. We need to support people in exercising those rights. We can welcome people, we certainly can, but we need to support the people in exercising their rights too. And I'm so proud to be here with you today, with so many of you do this, and this support is part of something that you do. So thank you all for coming along today and joining us. I'd like to thank our partners, Settled, Citizens Advice, TGP Cymru, Newport Mind and Newfields Law for all of the work that they've done in supporting the council to continue to welcome citizens to Newport. And I'd like to thank you all for the contributions that you're going to be making today. I'd also like to say, just before I leave you to get on with the session, over the past 12 months, I've never been prouder of the teams that we've worked here in Newport. They've tried so innovatively and so creatively to involve our communities and involve citizens and really engage with our citizens from the EU to really welcome them, but make sure that they're able to exercise their rights. And the creativity that's come from that has been so impressive. So I'm really proud of you all and what you've done for Newport. And I hope that everybody finds the session today really valuable. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Lida. We'll let you get your washing out now, I think. Thanks. We'll move straight on to our first session, which is going to be delivered by Hayley from TGP Cymru. And Hayley's going to take us through the basics of the EUSS and what it means for EU citizens and what it means for us as service providers.
That's great. Thanks ever so much, Heather. So yeah, as Heather said, we're going to start to run through as an introduction to the EUSS, and more detail will follow from the other presenters. Okay, can we start the first slide? So, overview of what the EU settlement scheme is, that everybody from the EEA and Switzerland must apply, even those with permanent residency. So this is important in terms of who needs to make an application. There are many people who have lived in the UK for a long time but don't have British passports. So if they are from the European Economic Area or Switzerland, they still must make an application even if they've lived here for a long time. Adults and children have to make an application. So again, many adults are making applications, but what we found is that they're not making them for their children, but every person has to make this application, but parents can link children under 21 into their application. So we advise that parents do theirs first, and once that's complete, to link in the children. At the beginning, the scheme was chargeable, but this hasn't been the case for a long time now, so it is completely free. This is important to know. All of the people presenting here today, we're all funded to be able to provide support. All of our support is free. So if you do come across anybody who is charging for this, please point people in our direction, as this shouldn't be charged for. The application and the proof of status is completely digital. There is a possibility of a paper application, but this is in rarer cases. This can be a struggle for many people. It is part of the Home Office's new move towards digital applications. And as I'm sure you can imagine, for people who perhaps aren't digitally literate or whose first language is not English, this can be quite complicated, and another reason why we're funded to be able to support people. Next slide. Oh, let me go back one. Thanks. So dates to remember. So there are quite a number of dates around this, and we'll go into it in more detail later on with with all of what these different dates mean. But just as an overview, so as everybody knows, the UK left the EU at the end of January last year. There was a transition period, and so when people were talking about in government and on the news about a deal or a no deal, this was something that had to be completed before the end of this transition period, which ended on the 31st of December with a deal. But the deadline to complete the EUSS application is the 30th of June this year. So there can be some confusion around those dates as to when that application needed to be completed. People do have until the end of June this year to be able to do that. So people who arrived after the 31st of December last year cannot apply to the EUSS. So this date of the 30th of June applies to people who arrived in the UK before the end of December last year. Anybody arriving from the 1st of January has to follow the new UK immigration rules, which are different to the EUSS, unless they have a family member to whom they can link an application to the EUSS. So again, with dates, something that's really important to be aware of and to very much take into consideration when people are applying for any kind of service is that nobody needs to apply, prove their status before the 30th of June 2021. So if somebody does come to you for support, then you can't ask for their proof in order to access services before the 1st of July this year. So this is important. We have seen people refuse services because they don't have their EUSS status. There is a lot of confusion around this. And in order to avoid this confusion, we want to be very clear that people can use their passports to access services until the 30th of June this year. So even though people can't necessarily be asked to provide their status before the 30th of June 2021, we do ask that if you come across anybody from the EEA or Switzerland who are coming to you for any kind of service, do take the opportunity to ask if they have their status, and if they don't, refer into our services. So we're here to be able to support people, but we really do emphasize the fact that this is a point of contact as an area of support to ensure people have their status, and not as an access point, and people can't be blocked from accessing services if they don't have that status. Next slide. So practically, the application is done online, as I said before. It's digital. It uses an app that can be downloaded and then moves on to the gov.uk website. So identity documents, which are passports or ID cards from countries, can be used using the app, which scans it. But this is only available on Android and iPhone 7 Plus. And so this can be a barrier to being able to actually use that app to make to start making the application. If you don't have access to the app, I have an iPhone 6, so I don't have access to it, then you can make the whole application online. You will then have to send in your documents in order to prove that to the Home Office. As I said earlier on, a paper application is available in exceptional circumstances. And again, with all of this, we don't expect anybody to be making these applications for service users. In fact, you can't do that because you're not registered. And so we would ask then to refer people into our organisations to complete the application if there are any issues around it or people need support. Next slide. So the application checks identity, residency and criminality in order for it to be made for somebody, then to show how long people have lived in the UK. So this is settled and pre-settled status, which we'll touch on in just a second, and criminality. So this is to avoid, this is in order for major crimes to be shown, something that is needed within the application process. So for documents to make this application for your identity, as I said just now, it's passport or a card from your home country. And then residency, it normally asks for a national insurance number to check HMRC and sometimes DWP records. But if people do not have that, then there is a whole list of evidence that can be uploaded in order to prove residency. Okay, so I think this is some confusion that people have around pre-settled status and settled status. So pre-settled status is for people who've been living less than 5 years in the UK. Then you have to stay in the UK for another 5 years and you can apply for settled status. So it's kind of a transition then into settled status. People can remain outside of the UK for up to 2 years. But as every application for settled status needs to have continuous residency of more than 6 months in 1 year, it's not advised to spend more than 6 months outside of the country. There are guidelines around the impact that COVID has had on this continuous residency. And again, if you come across anybody or yourself who's unsure of this, please get in touch with us. And then for settled status, it's for people who've lived for more than 5 years, sorry, and this is indefinite leave to remain equivalent. And so people can remain outside of the UK for up to 5 years after that. But, you know, it is important that people are aware that they could lose status if they spend longer outside. Okay, so we are all here in Newport, work at TGP Cymru, Citizens Advice is here, Newport Mind Settled and Newfields Law. As you can see here, we talk about OISC registration. This is a legal requirement for anybody providing immigration advice. Most of us are registered to OISC level 1 and Newfields Law to level 2 for more complex cases. But what this means is that if you are supporting somebody with anything else, you do not have the right to support for anything that is immigration related. So please refer to us. Okay. And then outside of COVID, there is digital support and there are scanning centres, and we can share this with you, but currently everything is closed due to COVID and hopefully they'll be open soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Hayley. Hearing you speak there, I'm reminded there's going to be an awful lot of information given to people in a very short space of time today. So as was included on your invitation, we are recording today's session, so you will be able to download it, hopefully from the Newport City Council website afterwards, and also share this link with anyone else who you think might find the information useful. And I would just encourage you, you know, if something's not making sense or you want to ask any questions, then please do pop them in the chat. I've also made my first mistake as host, but because before Hayley, we were going to ask everybody to complete a short poll just to measure your existing knowledge around some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So Alex is going to share that in a second. One of the things we'll ask you about is what you know about EUSS. So we can test how effective Hayley's been, because you should all know what it is now. But if you could just take a second to complete this poll, we'll be doing it again at the end of the session as well, just to see whether people have learned from today's content.
So the poll should pop up on your screens now.
It has popped.
Gone halfway through the polling.
Lovely. So there are 4 questions. If you scroll down, you should be able to see them all. Does it keep going, Alec, till everybody's voted, or can we
Yeah.
stop? Yeah,
It's
should we stop
up to,
when most people have?
yeah, 80% voted, so I'll stop it now.
Fab. Thanks, everybody. Lovely, and we'll do that quickly at the end of today's event as well. So our next speaker is Eva Plajarova, who works for Settled, and Eva is going to be telling us about the grace period, which is a term you may have heard being used over the last couple of months.
Good afternoon, all. So before, can we go to the next slide, please, Alec? One before, please. Okay. So just a recap after what Hayley said, there's some terminology that you might have heard has been in use. So we had Brexit Day last year, end of January. That's when when UK officially left the EU. And then we have the EU and UK withdrawal agreement, which was signed last year before the Brexit Day, and it just extension of all EU law until the end of last year. With end of last year, we ended the free movement, which means after the transition period, which was for 11 months last year, we entered the grace period from 1st of January this year. It is just an additional period for those EU nationals who have been living long-term in the UK and decided to make UK as their home to apply into the EU settlement scheme, especially those who might have come towards the end of last year. As Hayley mentioned, the status is all digital. By applying online, the whole digital thing doesn't end, because people will not be given a physical card or paper document. They will be given online status, which will be accessible through a digital code. And then also just remember, EU settlement scheme is not just for the EU nationals. It's also for family members who might be actually non-EU nationals. All they have to do, they have to prove that their relationship existed by the end of transition period, and they can still join as close family members. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so there's two deadlines we have to remember. One, which was the end of transition period, which is the residence deadline. That's the deadline. By that time, people who wanted to come and live here long term had to be in UK, be able to be eligible to apply into the EU settlement scheme. Everybody will have to apply by the end of the grace period, because they might find themselves unlawfully resident in UK if they don't. Next slide, please. So the second deadline, which the most important deadline for us is the end of grace period. Home Office did say that they will accept two conditions for late applications. So they have to be a good reason. So far, Home Office said good reason would be children whose parent or guardian did not apply in time on their behalf. Those who are in abusive relationships and have problems accessing their documents, or those who lack the physical and mental capacity. The second condition, that must be met is that they have to apply within a reasonable period of time, which means as soon as possible after the deadline. And they have to evidence the reasons why they were late. So a lot of people might be asking, what about if the family members or friends want to come and visit or stay with me? Well, family members, close family members will be able to join as long as, I said earlier, the relationship has been established. It is different for the Swiss citizens. Close family members are spouse or civil partner, so they will have to prove that with a marriage certificate or ceremony certificate. Durable partner, durable partner is somebody who is in a cohabiting relationship for 2 years. However, if there's a child in the relationship and the 2 years hasn't been Home Office, 2 years hasn't been reached, Home Office can be flexible, but usually it's 2 years proving that they have been in durable relationship. Children under 21 years and children above 21 years if they are dependent. So if somebody is still studying at university and dependent on parents financially, or they are dependent on their parents for care. And dependent parents, they will have to prove dependency, so it can be financial dependency or care. And all other family members are not eligible. Can we go to the next slide, please? So if friends and family want to come and visit after January 21, if they are from within the EU, EEA or Swiss family friends, they can come without visa and they can stay for up to 6 months. They won't be allowed to work or study and enjoy the benefits of those who reside here, who normally live here. Also, they should be aware that European ID cards will only be accepted until end of September for entering the UK. except of those who already registered their pre-settled or settled status to those national ID cards. Also, those who are not from EU or EEA should check if they need to apply for visa to enter the UK. Next slide, please. Okay, so until 30th of June, like Hayley already mentioned, people have time to put their things in order. Employers shouldn't be asking employees if they have applied or if they have their status, because at the moment, up till end of June, EU citizens, EU nationals still can access work with their valid passport or ID card. This will change from 1st of July. Until then, it is solely up to the employee whether they make an application or not. And there's no requirement for employees to inform employer whether they've done so or not. However, employee, if they want to remind, if the employee wants to remind the employee, they can do so, but they cannot ask for a status. Next slide, please. Also, those with status will be able to access the NHS for free if they meet the ordinary residence test. And in the legislation, a person is ordinary resident if they are normally residing in the UK, apart from temporary or occasional absences. So if they go for a short holiday, that's just a short occasional absence. Next, please. Social security benefits, those with settled status, is a permanent right to reside, so therefore they have access to all services and benefits. Pre-settled status, well, there has been the Court of Appeal case, and anyone with pre-settled status who satisfies the right to reside for benefits such as universal credit, pension credit, housing benefit, income support, child benefit, if they have been turned down, then they should appeal the decision. Next, please. I just touch on what Hayley already mentioned. People, I do apologize for the spelling mistake, sorry, applying. So those who have pre-settled status will have to go through the process again. They have to apply for settled status, and they will have to prove a continuous residence of 5 years. That means that they can not have absence larger than 6 months in any 12 period. So if you look at the picture, the person has in the first year accumulated absence of 3 months, in the second year 4 months. However, when you look at the any 12-month period, it falls into that any 12-month period, and therefore they already exceeded the 6 months. They stayed out 7 months. There could be one special circumstance when they can have 12-month period, but that would be like on medical grounds or childbirth, and that will have to be proved in evidence. If there are absences which are not like one long, you know, just 1 week here, 1 week there, then it should be counted as 180 days in any 12-month period. So people have to be very careful not to break this. At the moment, whilst we are still in grace period, those who might have accumulated large absences because of COVID, they traveled to their home countries and they haven't been able to come back yet. Those, they can apply again for pre-settled status by the end of June, and that way they will accumulate, they will have the chance to accumulate the 5 years continuous residence. Next slide, please. Okay, and just also to be aware that those with pre-settled status, they can work by 2 dates. One is the date in which when they reach the 5 years of continuous residence, and another date, they might have a completely different date on their pre-settled status. So for example, this person arrived to UK in April 2019, made the application in April 2020 and was approved for pre-settled status in May 2020. That means this person at earliest can apply in April 2024, because that's when they will achieve the 5 years after arriving in the UK of continuous residence, or they have until May 2025, because that's when the pre-settled status is expiring. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Eva. We're going to move straight on to our next speakers, David and Wayne, who are going to be taking us through some of the implications of leaving the EU and benefits entitlements with regards to EU citizens. I'll hand over to David and Wayne.
I'm not sure whether Wayne's here actually. So
I think Wayne's been in and out. I've seen him attempting to come in and then going back out. So I think he might be having technical difficulties.
Kicked off. So at the end bits, which are about employment and discrimination, I may have to wing it a bit.
No problem.
Okay. What I'm going to talk about really, most of my area of expertise is actually in respect of benefits and housing assistance, which is statutorily provided by the council. So if you can move to the next slide, please. Who is affected? Well, it's all EEA nationals who are affected by what I'm going to say. Okay, next slide. I think I'm reflecting on what's been said, and as we get into it, we'll make it a little bit clearer. The final rules at the end of the grace period may not change as the regulations aren't in place at the moment. Okay, to some extent of what we've been talking about is that it's only based on what government intend to do, not what they've actually legislated to do. So we'll have to bear that in mind. There are currently no plans to extend the grace period, although that may change. Okay, so you've got to move on. Basically, if you look at EEA nationals and EU nationals, they basically fall into 4 groups. There's people, EEA nationals, EU nationals who've been naturalised as British citizens or have been granted indefinite leave to remain. We have a number of cases where people have been in the UK for a very long time, and they're applied for indefinite leave to remain at the time. We're talking 20, 30 years ago. Okay. The next group of people are the settled status people. Then we have the pre-settled status, and then we have no status period. That means they haven't applied for anything. Okay, and we'll look at each one in turn. Although the first two, the naturalised, the citizenship route, if you like, and settled status, we look at as one. Okay, do you want to, next slide, please? Okay, settled status and citizenship route. You can claim benefits and seek housing assistance under general entitlement rules. So they're treated effectively like a British citizen. Okay, so they have no impediment to making claims, no impediments to going and asking the council for help with housing, etc. And that will continue unless it's lost, taken away in some way. Okay, so that's relatively straightforward, and that's the end game really. And if they can get that, that's the most desirable thing. It gets more complicated, as we'll see in the next slides. Okay, those who've got pre-settled status, they can claim benefits as normal, but need to meet the conditions of the right to reside test. Okay, this is basically what it's been like for EU nationals for a long time. And these are set as what's called the habitual residence test, and they have to show, for instance, they're workers or they have retained worker status. It's a very complex list of ways of being able to prove that they are able to effectively meet the right to reside test. If they have pre-settled status, that will still continue. Okay, so if they do make the claim, they will need to be able to do it. And I'll come to the Fratilla case in just a moment. Not all benefits are affected by this. For instance, if someone wants to claim personal independence payments, they are subject to different rules, and the right to reside test does not exist within it. So there's considerable barriers to people with pre-settled status for claiming particularly means-tested benefits. The main one being, of course, these days being universal credit. Now, there's been a lot of talk about the issue of the Fratilla case and the Court of Appeal decision. When that decision came out, I spoke to a number of people who jumped upon this as a means of helping people with pre-settled status, make it easier for them to claim benefits. And actually, I advised caution at that particular point of time, and I still advise caution. Leave to the appeal to the Supreme Court has been granted, so this case will not have any impact at the moment. There's also apparently another case of the European Court of Justice as well, but I don't know what that's all about. Okay, so if you are dealing with people in this area and they have pre-settled status, please don't be over reliant on the Fratilla case. What I suggest to people is that they try to go through the more traditional right to reside test and use the Fratilla test as a secondary object. The reason for that is because the DWP will look at Fratilla and will immediately just disallow the claim, even when they shouldn't do. Okay, so you just need to be cautious with it. The Fratilla is a fallback position. Okay, so just bear that in mind. If in doubt, get advice, because it is a complex area. Okay, next one. Right, this is a bit more uncertain, this area. These are people who have not been granted pre-settled or settled status, and effectively, the Department of Work and Pensions works on when the status is granted, not when it's been applied for. Okay, they don't backdate it, unfortunately. It's exactly the same as those with pre-settled status up to the end of the grace period, but they will also have to prove that they have a right to reside on the 31st of December 2020. So it's a double-edged sword. Now, this is a much more controversial area because this is what the restrictions which they have put in place, but we're not sure at the moment whether this is legal or not. Okay, but it's a further impediment and makes it much more of an imperative, if you like, for the person to actually make the pre-settled or settled application. Okay, because this is a further impediment. Okay. Next. So if they've got no settled status on the 30th of June 2021, there's going to be a bit of a presupposing they're not able to get it. They're not able to make a late application. They are basically then subject to immigration control and will have to claim benefits as though they are subject to immigration control. So that's why it's another reason why it's important to get this sorted out before the due date. Okay, moving on. Right, just a little bit on employment and discrimination. This is something that I had hoped Wayne would talk to you a little bit about, because I can't.
I'm here, David.
Sorry?
I am here.
Oh, Wayne. Oh, well done, Wayne. Off you go. Way!
Yes, a few technical glitches, but I am actually here. Sorry, my video not working. One of the big issues is going to be obtaining employment and keeping it, because with the best will in the world, a lot of employers will not necessarily understand the rules and may be looking for evidence of rights to work that that individuals may not have or may not understand what they're getting. And of course, there is also the issue of possible discrimination in the workplace with, well, for want of a better phrase, bad behaviour of other employees or employers. There's going to be issues with accessing housing provision, again, right to rent, to be able to get into both public and private rental sector, access to healthcare, and access to education, things that we take for granted, but may not be as easy to obtain for people who are not familiar with our systems. As I say, there are very clear rights set out in the Equality Act in terms of racial discrimination, etc. But there's a very strong chance that there will be mistakes made because people won't understand the rules or will misapply the rules. So something that definitely needs advice from employment specialists or discrimination specialists when you come across them.
Thanks,
Right.
David. Sorry, David, were you going to say something else?
Yeah, I was just going to say that's our bit, really.
Oh, right. Thank you. I think when we talk about things like benefits, it is so complex and it will be so dependent on people's individual circumstances. And I suppose one of the other benefits of today is just to raise awareness of the range of services that are funded to support people that might find themselves with questions. And as I said, we will be circulating details of all the service providers today. So if you've got sort of people that you come into contact in the future that you have concerns for, or you need to ask specific questions around, you will be able to do that. We've talked a lot about sort of processes and forms and dates and legislation and all the technical bits. But ultimately, we are talking about communities, we are talking about people, we are talking about families, we're talking about children, we're talking about parents. And we mustn't forget that. And I know certainly lots of people on the call will be working with individuals and families that have been quite profoundly affected by some of these changes. And we wanted just to remind people, you know, we are talking about people, not just process. And Joanna has kindly agreed to talk about her personal experience of applying to the EUSS and what that has sort of looked and felt like for her. So I'm going to hand over to Joanna for a few minutes.
Thank you, Heather. Hello, everybody. My name is Joanna and I originally come from Poland. And I have been living in the UK for the past 15 years and almost half of my entire life. I consider Wales and Newport as my home. I started family here and my children were born in Newport. They attend school in Newport. I made lots of friends and I also work within citizen advice. In the past, I have been helping clients applying for the EU settlement scheme, as well as my friends who were asking me for advice and guidance, and how to apply for the settlement. If I can tell you a little bit about my personal experience applying for the settlement scheme. When I came to the UK in 2007, I never thought I would have to go through the process that I had to go in 2019. In 2019, I was already living in the UK for over 13 years. And when I applied for the settled status, I have been told that I can be granted pre-settled status, which obviously didn't give me the rights that I was hoping to have. I was a little bit disappointed because all this time living in the UK, I've worked, I've paid taxes, I was taking part with different projects, and I was a part of the Polish community and the British community as well. I was raising my children who were born here and who are British citizens. So like I've mentioned, I was a little bit disappointed, but the process of applying for the settled status wasn't straightforward, but it wasn't too complicated either, because all I had to do, I had to prove that I've been residing for over 5 years, which I have proven by uploading more evidence. And within 3 days, I have been granted a settled status, which obviously given me more rights and a little bit of security. And the hopes that I have for the future are that I hope that, EU citizens and citizens of Great Britain will be united, rather than divided. I hope that we can work together and then we can treat each other as, brothers and sisters, and that the British, community will see us, as friends and as one of them, and that, I think we have a lot to offer, in terms of our experience and in terms of, our language and traditions, and we can share those experiences and traditions with people in the UK. I hope that, we will have the equal opportunities to apply for jobs, and that is not actually the law that we are allowed to work here, but will actually be, taken into consideration. And I do also hope that we can progress in our careers, and if we would like to study, we wouldn't have any problems. Saying that, I do also hope that there won't be any problems in the future if we want to keep links and strong relationships with the countries where we are from. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna. Yeah, I feel like we should give you a little, so you probably only hear me clapping, but I can see other people clapping as well. Thanks very much for sharing your story with us. And I think, one of the things we're really mindful of, and I think somebody's already put it in the chat, that those people who may find it more challenging to go through that process because of language barriers, or the fact they may not even have heard of the EUSS or don't believe that they need to apply. There are layers of disadvantage and layers of barriers which may present to prevent people from applying to the EUSS. So today, as well as giving information to people, is also about encouraging you to have informed and sensitive conversations with people who you may come into contact with, who may need to think about applying to the EUSS. And as has been explained, we can't force people to apply. It is a personal choice. We can't require people at this time to prove that they have pre-settled or settled status for any reason. But what we can do is encourage people to apply if they need to, and start having those conversations, particularly as the deadline draws closer. We're looking at the end of June for all those applications to be made. Thanks again, Joanna. So we're going to move on. I think we've got Donald next from Newport Mind. We've referenced this idea of digital status a couple of times throughout the presentation. So Donald's going to talk a little bit more about what digital status is, what it looks like, and potentially some of the problems that we may encounter with it.
Thank you, Heather. Next slide, if I'm ready to start, Alec. As mentioned by Hayley, the EU settlement scheme process is primarily a digital system, which results in a digital status. So I thought it would be useful to go over what happens once someone has been granted pre-settled or settled status, and to follow what they would receive and how to access their digital status. So once granted pre-settled or settled status, applicants usually receive an email with a letter attached, which is a notification of their leave. That letter will state what status they've been granted, the outcome of the case, whether they've been granted settled or pre-settled status. And it's also important to note that that letter is not proof of their immigration status and cannot be used to prove their status. So it's merely a letter providing a notification of their leave, and can be used as an indication of whether they've applied or not, or what status they have. But in order to prove their status or view their status, they would have to access their status online through a digital system. So to view or prove your settled or pre-settled status online, you would have to use the Home Office's online status service, and I've provided a link to it within the presentation. So this service allows people who have been granted pre-settled or settled status to view their status online, to update their details, and to prove their status to others. And the process of proving their status to others would be done through generating a share code. So within this online portal, they would be able to click that they would like to prove their status to someone, and it would generate a share code, which then they would pass on to whoever wanted to view their status, and they would also have to access that status online. So this is an example of what an applicant for what someone who has received settled or pre-settled status would view online once they get their status. So on the online portal, it would state what status they have. If they have pre-settled status, it would state the date that status was valid until. If they have settled status, that wouldn't be there, because as with settled status, they have it indefinitely, and it would state their rights. It's also important to note that in future, when you're asking someone to prove their status, to let them know the reasons why, because on the whole online portal, people can choose between 3 options: to prove their right to reside, to prove their right to work, or both. So we can go to the next slide. It's extremely important to note that some people will struggle to view and prove their pre-settled or settled status due to difficulties accessing or using the online service. This could be due to factors such as the following: and language barriers. The majority of people we work with, I think this is true of all the organizations who are delivering this session, the majority of people we work with speak a language other than English or Welsh as their main or preferred language. And in some cases, we do work with people who have low levels of literacy, or who struggle, or who are non-proficient in English. For people in these circumstances, accessing their status through a digital system and proving their status to someone else is more difficult than it seems, because they would have to navigate the system independently and also share their status. So it's important to take that into consideration. So if you're working with someone, the fact that they can't prove their status doesn't mean that they haven't applied or been granted pre-settled or settled status. In cases like that, it's best to refer to supporting organizations. We can assist them to check if they've received their status or help them to prove it. Another category is age or disability. One of the things that we've noticed is throughout the application process is we work with people aged 50 and above, and in some cases people with disabilities, and their ability to use the digital system independently is limited. In some cases, this is due to digital exclusion or low levels of digital literacy or other factors that impact their ability to use this digital system. So it's important to note that for people who are of a certain age or who have disabilities, they also may face some difficulties accessing their status. And then the last area I'd like to focus on is digital exclusion. While the majority of applicants we work with do have access to the internet or have used the internet before, their ability to use the online system is sometimes limited, because it often involves accessing the system in English or navigating through the Home Office's online portal is something they often can't do unassisted. And these are people that we have to book face-to-face appointments to support to apply for settled status. So we anticipate that after being granted their status, when they have to view and prove their status, they would still need that additional support. I think the most important thing to take into consideration is that when you come across someone who may have pre-settled or settled status, and you require them to prove it, it's important to take the more compassionate approach and see if you can support them to access support to do that, instead of turning them away or simply telling them that they have to prove their status. A lot of the organizations who are delivering the session should be available to provide that support if necessary. And then the final part I'm going to speak about is, when can you check if someone has pre-settled or settled status? The most important point is how you check EU, EEA, Swiss Swiss citizens' right to live or work in the UK has not changed, even though the UK has left the EU. As highlighted by Hayley and other speakers, they can still use their passport or national identity card until the 30th of June 2021. EU, EEA, and Swiss citizens who were resident in the UK before the end of the transition period have until the 30th of June 2021 to apply to the EU settlement scheme. So if you're speaking to someone and you do ask them, have they applied to the EU settlement scheme? If they haven't, a quick fix would be simply to refer them to a supporting agency who can support them to make an application for settled or pre-settled status. And it's important to note that the new rules will only apply after the 30th of June 2021, and anyone who has already, at that date, anyone who has already made an application for pre-settled or settled status, their rights will still apply until their application is concluded. So they will still have the same rights until they receive a decision from the Home Office. And that's me.
Thank you, Donald. That was really useful and really clear. One of the things that people are quite fearful of is this move to a digital only status. If you think about the history that the UK has around things like the Windrush scandal, we don't have a good track record of providing reassurance to people about their immigration status through digital means. And people are quite keen to have something physical that they can hold on to, which is not going to be the case with this. And as Donald has said, can be quite confusing and scary for people as well. So that's one way that we can support people, is to signpost them to people that know how they will be able to check and use their status effectively once we move into July. We're doing really well for time. We're coming up to our last speaker. So everybody can leave a bit early, which is always really good. Our last speakers are Alicia and Edward from Newfields Law. So they're going to summarise some of what we've talked about today through a bit of a myth-busting presentation. Alec, we move on. Lovely, thank you.
Thanks, Heather. So I'm Edward.
And my name's Alicia.
So we work for Newfields Law. We're paralegals with the firm at the moment. And we just thought we'd do a section on myth busting. This should hopefully help to potentially answer any questions that you might have in your mind. And if you've perhaps already heard some information about the EU settlement scheme, this should hopefully help to just like clarify a few things about it. So if we could just go to the next slide, please.
Okay, so if I don't have a national insurance number, I cannot apply to the EU settlement scheme. So this is wrong. You don't need to have a national insurance number to make an application. Applying to the EU settlement scheme is purely based on one's residence in the UK. If you did have a national insurance number, then this will be a good document to input into your application. There is a section when applying that allows you to put this in, but as I say, it's not necessary. So on the slide, there's a list of other documents that can be used. And essentially these documents will be provided to show your residence in the UK. So for example, as Hayley and others have mentioned, if you apply for settled status, you'll be proving at least 5 years residence in the UK. And as an example, this could be used through a tenancy agreement or council tax bills. It's just important that documents show your name and UK address and covers the time period that you're applying to the EU settlement scheme for. Next slide, please.
So this one is, children do not need to make an application where their parent has applied. So this is wrong. It's really important that children apply independently to the EU settlement scheme. Obviously the parent can help, but they do need to make separate applications. When a child does make their separate application, they can link that application to their parents to receive the same status. So this would allow, for example, a child who's only a few months old to receive settled status where their parent has settled status as well.
So once I have pre-settled status, it will automatically update to settled status after 5 years. This is also, so as mentioned, you have been in the UK for less than 5 years, you apply for pre-settlement. Doesn't mean that once you 5 years continuous residence in the UK, that all of a sudden your status updates. You'll have to reapply using the same application process, but this time apply for settled status. And just the only difference is that you'll be explaining that you've been here for 5 years or more and showing evidence to reflect this.
So if I have criminal convictions, I will not be able to get a status under the EU settlement scheme. So again, this is wrong. If an individual does have criminal convictions, this doesn't automatically mean that it's a refusal under the EU settlement scheme. The individual may still be able to get a status. This will just be dependent on what the conviction is. The most important thing is to encourage individuals to disclose whether they have any criminal convictions or not. If they're unsure, or if you're unsure when you're helping somebody, feel free to get in touch with us and we'll be able to offer some advice on this. But just important to highlight, must disclose any criminal convictions.
So once I have applied to the EU settlement scheme, I should receive a card to prove my status. So as Heather said, we understand that some people may feel anxious about this because it's all an online platform now to view and prove your status. So obviously this myth is wrong. So EU, EEA and Swiss citizens will not receive a physical document of their status, but non-EEA citizens applying will receive a card. So once applied, if you're a non-EEA applicant, you will receive a biometric residence card. And then when you receive your application, you'll have a status outcome letter. Here it will detail if you have made an application but haven't yet received your biometrics card, then information is on there for you to report it and to request for this. If you do have a biometrics card and you're an EEA citizen now, then it's important that you transfer that from EEA to the new EU SS residence permit card.
If I'm an EU citizen and married to a British citizen, I do not need to apply to the EU settlement scheme. So this is wrong. Individuals in this scenario still need to apply independently. It's really, really important that you encourage all EU citizens to apply to the EU settlement scheme. Again, if an individual is unsure whether they need to apply, make sure to encourage them to get in touch with us or one of the other organisations.
My employer can end my contract after 31st December 2020 if I have not yet applied to the EU settlement scheme. Again, this is wrong, as already previously mentioned by other presenters. All an employer can ask for to show your right to work in the UK is your EU, EEA, Swiss passport or national ID card. If individuals have not yet applied to the EU settlement scheme and who are in fact eligible and need to, then you would have had to have done this by the 30th of June 2021 to be able to continue, continue residing and working, etc. post June. But you will be able to work up until the 30th of June. But at this point, we would just advise that if you do need to make an application, that you do this as soon as you possibly can to avoid any stresses applying further and closer to the deadline.
If I do not have an identity document, I cannot apply. Again, this is wrong. So due to COVID-19, some ID documents may still be valid despite the expiry date. So because some countries have closed their embassies due to the pandemic, some countries have extended the expiry date of ID documents where they expired during the start of COVID and throughout. We've got an article on our website just explaining this and detailing which specific countries have done this and for how long they've done this. Where an individual is unable to access ID at all, they may still be able to apply using a paper form. If someone's struggling with this, feel free to get them in touch with us or one of the other organisations and we'll be happy to help.
If I have permanent residence, I do not need to apply to the EU settlement scheme. Again, this is wrong. All those with permanent residence still need to apply. It's really important that you do so. Just because you have this, it doesn't mean you're exempt. You must make an application to the EU settlement scheme. When making the application, there is a section that allows you to input your information of your permanent residence that you have. And then at the end, you'll be able to upload evidence along with any other residence documents as well. And yeah, you can provide evidence of your permanent residence at the end of your application. So it's just important that those with this apply to the EU settlement scheme too.
I have to be working or self-employed for 5 years to be eligible for settled status. So this is wrong. The EU settlement scheme is based entirely on residence in the UK, not whether you are working. So for example, an individual could have been homeless for 5 years, but they would still be eligible to apply for the EU settlement scheme. Therefore, you don't need to have worked, had health insurance, been in education, etc. to qualify under the EU settlement scheme. Main requirement is that you have been resident in the UK before the 31st of December 2020.
Thanks, Edward and Alicia. So that's the end of our sort of formal presentations. We'll allow a little bit of time for questions and answers if anybody's got any questions that haven't been answered already by the session. Just a comment in the chat. So is there information being sent out to different HR departments so they can actively support giving time off or supporting employees through signposting to services? Concern about workers who may work in retail or get little free time, especially if they have families or digital or language concerns that make it more difficult to them. I wonder if anyone on our panel would like to make a comment around how your work has helped to perhaps remove some of those barriers for people. I'll get no one offering to answer now, I can predict it now.
I'll answer.
Hayley.
So in terms of this, what we're trying to do by having webinars such as this, being out in the community, speaking to as many people as possible, is to try and make these links so that we can talk to wider organisations. We've had some success. We have approached different organisations individually, tried to give as much information as possible. It's not something that we can impose upon people. We can only be there to support. And so what we do ask is anybody attending here, you know, if you do know anyone who's working in HR, anybody who does have their own business, who, you know, has a number of people working for them, you know, feel free to pass our information on to them. We will continue to try and engage with as many businesses and business forums as possible. We also do this through local councils and kind of official channels, but we also then try and reach out as much as possible to the public. So, you know, if you know of anybody who is working in retail and is struggling to make an application, they can get in. Typically we would work during the day, but we can also, you know, be there to accommodate other people who perhaps have more unsociable hours. The most important thing for us is to ensure that everybody makes an application and that everybody maintains their right to reside and work and be in the UK without any issue. So whichever way we can do that, we will do it.
Thanks, Hayley. So I'll just open it out for any other questions that people might have. If you want to ask a question, if you could just raise your hand, that'd be great. Oh, I think we've got something in the chat. If I understood, children have to apply for themselves as a separate application. Hayley?
Yeah, they don't, it is a separate application and that can be done through the parents. So what happens is that the parent makes the application, they have an application number, and then when you start to work with the family and the child, you scan their document and it actually then sees that they're under 21 and asks if you want to link in with a different application. You then enter in the parent's application number. So it is a separate application, but it can be linked if that is what is wanted to the parent's application.
Thanks, Hayley. I can see Agnes is still popping some bits in the chat, so it might be worth you just replying to that. Any other questions from anybody else? No? Okie doke. Well, we won't keep you any longer than necessary. I'm just going to ask Alec, and yes, it is free. But that's not to say there may be associated costs, if I'm right, Hayley.
There are no associated costs for making the application. All of our services are free. That's why we ask you to either give our contact details out to friends and family. If you're a frontline service worker, please refer any service users into us. There will be people out there, I'm sure, from now and going forward, as there are, for any case of trying to charge for services that shouldn't be charged for. So, you know, whilst we are funded to do this work, please refer people into us to avoid any charges.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Alec just to pop the poll up once more, and just appreciate you spending a couple of minutes answering those same questions before we finish. Thanks, Alec. Yeah, so I just picked up your question. We've got lots of resources, lots of leaflets, lots of posters in different languages. So yeah, absolutely, we can supply child interruption. We can supply leaflets and posters if anybody needs them or wants to advertise the scheme. We'd be more than happy to. Just get in touch. Okie doke, final call for questions. Lovely. All right, thank you again for coming along today, and thanks for all of our speakers as well. It's been an effort to coordinate everybody and get everyone here, so your time is much appreciated, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Thanks everybody.